Welcome. In this presentation, we will be discussing the Gerlach and Ely design model. This model was first introduced by Vernon Gerlach and Donald P. Ely in 1971, written for the first edition of Teaching and Media, a Systematic Approach. This model, like many other instructional design models, is cyclical in nature, where the end stage feeds back into the earliest stages of planning instruction in order to inform decision-making. The primary focus of this model centers on a systematic method of planning instruction. To this end, there are two essential design factors: the defining of an instructional goal and the selected methods to achieve those goals, hereafter referred to as the objective and the content, respectively. While this model is cyclical, there are some steps that must be completed in a linear order, while other steps are simultaneous. The model operates on the idea that the average classroom teacher is an instructional designer and empowers them to make systematic implementations that result in positive learning outcomes. Here is a visual representation of the Gerlach and Ely design model. As you can see, there are 10 total steps, with 3 initial considerations that occur in a linear fashion. Steps 4 through 8 occur both concurrently and interdependently. Steps 9 through 10 are, again, linear in nature and feed back to the initial stages to perpetuate the instructional cycle. Now we will examine each step of the model in closer detail. The first 2 steps are interconnected and synthesized. The specification of content concerns itself with the instructor's selection of media to achieve the objectives. The full scope of educational media should be considered in this step, from online learning platforms to more traditional paper and pen strategies. When specifying objectives, the instructor should aim to describe something that the learner does or produces. State a behavior or a product of behavior that is observable or measurable, the conditions under which those outcomes can be achieved, and the criteria that define whether or not an objective has been met. Objectives should align with any predetermined guidelines, such as organizational or state and local regulations. Some may argue that specifying an objective should come first when planning instruction. However, in practice, either content or objective can come first, as denoted on the model with the double-sided vertical arrow. They are very closely related. Following the specification of content and objectives, the instructor should conduct an assessment of entry behaviors. In this step, teachers should evaluate learners' present skills and whether they need the instruction. Pre-tests and student records of past performance can help to achieve this aim. As we continue on, remember that steps 4 through 8 of the Gerlach and Ely design model are both interconnected and concurrent. This means that they should all be considered at the same time and with regard to their effect on the other elements in this stage. Teachers should determine their instructional strategy. Will their instruction be expository, such as a lecture style, wherein students demonstrate that they have acquired the information presented? Or will instruction be inquiry-based, where students ask and answer questions and present their understanding? In this step, teachers decide how to present and use information and what role students will undertake during instruction. Teachers must also consider the organization of groups. Students may work independently, in groups, or with varying levels of interaction between both the teacher and their peers. Gerlach and Ely take care to note that individual students learn at different rates, which should be planned and accommodated for when considering grouping and materials. Grouping should be appropriate for the instructional strategy selected. For example, teachers will likely not group students into clusters for a lecture-style lesson. Allocation of time and space should be considered when deciding on grouping strategies and objectives. If the instructor is considering group work, is there enough physical space in the room? If the instructor implements an inquiry-based strategy, will there be enough instructional time for students to ask, answer, and present their findings to independent questions? These are all factors that teachers should consider when allocating time and space. Teachers should carefully select their resources to be used in instruction in order to make sure that the instructional objectives are met. Resources should be specifically selected for the response that they prompt from the learner, not from the simple stimulus of the resource itself. In addition, Gerlach and Ely differentiate between instructional materials and learning resources, qualifying that the difference is that materials do not become resources until learners have gained meaningful context for them. These resources can include multimedia elements, texts, simulations, and so on. All of these elements are equally important and also appropriate and applicable in different scenarios. Any decision made in one of these steps will have an impact on the others, and so instructors should take care to plan elements that will best align with predefined objectives. The final two steps of the Gerlach and Ely model are evaluation of performance and analysis of feedback. These two steps are linear. When evaluating performance, instructors determine whether or not students achieved the criteria of the established instructional objective. These should be clear and measurable or observable. Instructors should also evaluate whether or not student success, or lack thereof, can be directly attributed to the instruction provided. Finally, teachers should use this information to analyze the feedback and determine the overall effectiveness of the teaching strategy. Instructors should reflect on what worked and what didn't, and what could be modified moving forward. This step on the Gerlach and Ely design model feeds back into the initial steps of specifying content and objectives, so that any necessary adjustments in the future can be implemented. Some advantages of the Gerlach and Ely design model are as follows. First, the streamlined and step-by-step nature of the model allows for easy and widespread implementation, and can be used by even novice teachers. The explicit layout of various considerations for planning instruction can be helpful when designing lessons in a narrow or a broad scope. This design is also fairly flexible and encourages teachers to consider their limitations in the planning phase, thinking ahead to what else may be impacted as a result of limited resources. This model also allows for varied assessment types. This model can be implemented alongside other instructional models and applied to many instructional strategies from group work to independent work. The model allows for content and objectives to be selected for simultaneously with the same weight and emphasis, and also considering one's effect on the other, viewing the two as a partnership. Finally, this model acknowledges and encourages the instructor to consider and accommodate the individual needs of the learner. To conclude this presentation, here are the discussion questions. The first asks, how might an educator decide which strategies and materials to use for their lessons? The second question asks the audience to consider and discuss the role of the teacher in the Gerlach and Ely design model. Finally, discuss what limitations, if any, you believe may exist in this model. Thank you for watching.